welcome back to Drive Home Review's end of the year wrap up. So last time we did what we had to do and we looked at the worst films that 2021 had to offer. Now, before I jump to the best films, I always like to take a stop off in that middle ground. Now, for those of you who this might be your first experience with the Drive Home Review's end of the year wrap up, what most critics do is they tend to separate everything from the year into the best and the worst categories. But the problem I have with that is that so much of what we consume doesn't fall within those two categories. It falls somewhere in the middle. Most of the stuff we watch or listen to or enjoy on a daily basis isn't the creme de la creme. It's that middle ground, the stuff that wasn't quite good enough to make the best list, but is still relatively enjoyable despite a couple minor flaws that keep it off of those lists. So I feel that we need to acknowledge those contributions because really, in a lot of cases, they're the ones you're going to watch a lot more. So I like to take this time, and before we jump to the best list, I like to take a look at what I like to call the best of the rest, or the top 10 meh films of 2021. Here we go.
Should we trust him, your neutralness?
All I know is my gut says maybe.
Number 10. The Last Duel and West Side Story. So it's been a little while since I've pulled this trick out of my hat, but I gotta say, just across the board, all three of these lists, these were very difficult to put together this year. Not the major list, not the top ranked films in all three categories, but the bottom ones. The last two or three were really a challenge on all three lists. And especially this one, I agonized looking at all the films I've seen and going, what was like the 10th most mediocre or just okay film of the year? And these two films bounced back and forth, and finally the only thing I could think to do was to have them share a space. And why not? They're both good films, but they do have kind of lingering issues that drag them down a little bit. The Last Duel is an incredibly well directed, extremely well acted. The cast is second to none. And an interesting take on the Rashomon film trope of trying to show the same film or the same story from three different perspectives, each time illustrating how each character views the same events differently. The downside, it's kind of a drag. It's a dour film. It's not something that you are going to rush out and want to see again and again, despite the fact that there's probably a lot you'll pick up upon multiple viewings. And I do not agree. I'm a grumpy old man, self-acknowledged and proud, but I do not agree with director Ridley Scott's assertion that the reason this movie didn't do well was because of the kids and their short attention spans. I think the reason this film didn't do well is because it's an artsy film. It's a think piece. It's something you have to watch and really pay attention to, and it asks you to think about things. Now, that's not a bad thing at all. It's the same reason why, yes, Citizen Kane may be the greatest movie ever made, but it's not the movie I'm going to pop into my DVD player when I get home after a hard day's work. It's the constant struggle of trying to make artistic expression in a commercial medium. So it has its downsides, but it was basically a good egg. Same thing with West Side Story. In this case, we have something that is unbelievably well directed. In some cases, I think over-directed by Steven Spielberg. New take on familiar material, doing all the things that Blythe Spirit did not do, and taking full advantage of it. Downside, it never quite was able to overcome the inherent problems in this script, i.e. that our two main characters are pretty much the dullest main characters in American musical theater history. Also, I have a problem in both versions with the fact that Maria just really gets over the fact that her brother is dead just like that. It's really kind of cruel on her part. Anywho, in either case, I think there are good things there. There are qualities to be admired, but I understand why not a lot of people rushed out to see them. Number 9, Dream Horse. So, a lot of the pictures that I saw this year, especially in the early goings, are holdovers from 2020. Things that were displaced due to the pandemic, and as such, we're really struggling to figure out where they were going to end up. You know, whether they were going to try for a theatrical release or they were going to try to go direct to streaming or whatever. And Dream Horse is one of those films I was actually able to see in the theater after I went back, and I'm a firm believer in the concept that things happen when they are supposed to. I'm not a very religious person or a very spiritual person, but I do believe things happen when you need them, and that's very true of art. And in this case, I think Dream Horse happened right when it needed to happen, because it's a story of a community trying to come back together after incredibly hard times and find something they can all get behind and root for again. And Lord, if that has not been the story of 2021 as a whole, and early days 2021 in particular. Albeit a somewhat generic film, your usual feel-good story, but it's a feel-good story that actually made you feel good and made you feel like you wanted to be part of some kind of community again, which, given what we've all gone through, I don't think that's any small feat. Number 8, Encanto. I've said it multiple times, and I will continue to say it, that one of the inherent issues with my chosen platform and format of my reviews is that you're giving a gut reaction to something, and a lot of times my gut is on par and it's usually pretty good, but other times some films need a little bit more consideration before you figure out, you know, exactly how you felt about them. And I feel like that's the case with this one. I gave this one kind of a mediocre review, and while I still think it's kind of a middle of the road Disney picture, I do think there was more going on here than I initially felt. I definitely enjoy the atmosphere. The colors are a lot of fun. The character designs are interesting. I love the unique look at superpowers and how you can use them outside of fighting evil. And I have to say, and I think I gave the songs in this a little bit of a bad rap, but I actually went back and re-listened to them on YouTube with subtitles so I could actually understand what the hell they were saying half the time. And I have to say, I've turned the corner on those. I think these are actually some pretty good songs. Say what you will about Lin-Manuel Miranda. Two things you can say about him that he does better than anyone. Number one, earworm songs that get in your head and won't leave. You know, so he's great at that. And two, he has a gift for really creative and interesting rhyme schemes. And that's what makes his work stand out. Now, it doesn't change the fact I still think our main heroine is a pretty bland character. And I know that's kind of the point, but even more so than I think they were intending. And that, well, I like the songs. A lot of them just seem to come out of nowhere and felt very jarring. But that all being said, I do think this is an above average Disney offering, and, you know, I give them credit for a lot of creative thinking. Number 7, Luca. I had to put this on one of these lists because, Lord help me, it was a Pixar movie that I actually enjoyed. Now, yes, it does suffer from the weirdly specific recurring plot of underwater characters with overprotective parents, but what I really enjoyed about this film, outside of the heavy Italian and Mediterranean influences, is that it really did feel like a genuine recreation of kids playing together over the summer. making new friends, going on adventures, staying out late, disobeying your parents, the fights that inevitably pop up, the reconciliations, and of course the heartbreak of having to go back to school. Not one of Pixar's more complicated films, but I don't really like their complicated films anyway. I prefer a short, sweet, heartfelt little movie like this one. And how could I not acknowledge a Pixar film that actually made my grumpy old heart grow 3 sizes that day? Number 6. Cruella. I am genuinely opposed to these Disney live-action remakes of classic animated films. I don't have as difficult a time with the reinterpretation of classic characters like Maleficent and this example. I find I'm able to relax around these a little bit more when you consider that they're not a prequel or a remake, they're fan fiction that somebody spent millions of dollars to film. And when you look at it from that perspective, that you're just taking a popular character and using the recognizable iconography in order to tell a new story, then the whole thing works a lot better for me. And I definitely think this is kind of the creme de la creme of those. This was a very energetic, very interesting, beautifully designed. The costumes are second to none. Well, maybe second to one. But we'll get to that much later. Anyway, interesting take on a familiar Disney premise. Downside, it's a little overlong, a little too self-indulgent, and ultimately fairly forgettable. I hadn't really thought about this movie since I saw it, and then, went back to look at the list of films I'd reviewed to make up these lists. But I do remember enjoying it more than I thought I was going to, and it also deserves a very special place on this list, being the first movie back in the theater that I went and saw. So, if for no other reason, Cruella has earned its place in Drive Home Reviews history. Number 5. Jungle Cruise. I might as well have just named this list Disney Presents, the top 10 films of 2021, I should say, because there are just a lot of Disney movies on this list and more to come. But I did have a genuinely good time with Jungle Cruise, trying to recapture that initial burst of energy that its immediate predecessor, Pirates of the Caribbean, brought into theaters, 15 years ago almost? I forget exactly how long it's been, but it's been a minute. I don't think it quite became the cultural touchstone that Pirates did, and I don't know if it set off any chain reactions the way that movie did, but it was still high energy, a lot of fun, good characters, and yeah, just an all good time at the movies. A nice thing to wash the taste out of your mouth after seeing M. Night Shyamalan's Old. Number 4. Godzilla vs. Kong. Alright, look, admittingly, there are movies on this list that were a lot better than Godzilla vs. Kong. I mean, this thing is a mess, just all over the place. And that's the problem when you try to course correct and go from taking everything uber serious to trying to be more like a Marvel movie. Much like I mentioned with American Traitor, I also do not believe that having one of your major protagonists be a conspiracy theorist podcaster who is proven right might not be the most responsible choice to make in today's political climate. Would have worked great back in the 90s, but this day and age, yeah, not so much. Not really the best choice to be going on with. Especially when you consider that really the evil plan that the guy was investigating was not all that evil. the president of Evil Co. wanted to build a robot to help defend humanity against the giant fucking monsters that are always attacking, and Godzilla somehow took umbrage with that. So, yeah, but I have to also give it credit for the improvements it did make. This time, making the smart choice of having Kong be our central protagonist means that even when the action switched back to our uninteresting human characters, it was still all about the monsters and still closely related to them. And, you know, the reason this one goes high on the list is I have to admit that the movie delivered on what it promised us. I can forgive a lot so long as you don't lie to me. And this movie promised me a giant monkey fighting a giant lizard, and that is what I got. It didn't cut away for stupidness with the humans. It let the action play out, and the fights were interesting and a lot of fun to watch. I don't know if I totally agree with jobbing Kong out, but, you know, somebody has to lose. It's just the way it has to be. So, there you have it. Not a perfect movie, not a perfect franchise, but I still have to say I had a good time watching it. Number 3. Finding You. I know, it seems weird. This is such a generic nothing of a movie that I found in a DVD rack in Target. So you know that it's not one of the high-end films. And in truth, it is just another one of your young adult romances. You know, it could fit the mold of billions of others. But, you know, there's a thing about that genre in that it is very comforting. And I think that's the best way to describe this movie. It's nothing earth-shattering. It's nothing genre-redefining. It's a nice, pleasant little film with a wonderful location, better than average performances, and characters that you enjoy spending time with. It's the very definition of a meh film. It's nothing that's going to set the world on fire, but it's a nice, quiet little romantic film that you watch on a rainy afternoon while eating macaroni and cheese with your beloved. I mean, and who could ask for more than that, really? Number 2. The Eternals. It was a busy year at the movies for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Just a whole host of films hitting theaters this year. And of the 4 major releases and their various television shows premiering on Disney+, I think the one that people were the most curious about was The Eternals. Because here, much like its immediate spiritual predecessor, Guardians of the Galaxy, which itself went on to become a cultural touchstone just by itself, The Eternals is based on a comic that was never really that well received, and whose internal mythology is so dense and confusing and constantly being retconned and redone that, you know, it seemed perfect for a Marvel Cinematic Universe reboot, a chance to strip away all of the unnecessary bits, keep the stuff that worked, and add some new things. Again, just like they did with Guardians of the Galaxy. So this was the biggest chance that I think Marvel took at the movies this year, and really I think it may be the biggest chance they took in their entire filmography. So the question then becomes, how did it do? And the answer is, well, it's number 2 on the meh list. That should give you some indication. I think it did better than it had any right to, and I think where its strengths lay are, 1, in the brilliant directing, and 2, in the absolute stellar cast. This is a wonderful ensemble of actors that create not only interesting characters in their own right, but interesting character dynamics and relationships throughout the entirety of the film. In fact, that's where the film is at its strongest, when it is just focusing on these characters and their relationships and their reactions to the world around them. And as I said in my initial review, that is what I think the film should have been. If the film had been all that, just watching these characters progress through history and watching their relationships take shape as human history unfolds around them, I think that would have been a much better movie than what we ended up getting, because this one felt like it had to adhere to the Marvel plot and the things that have to be included in a Marvel film, and it just felt like that got in the way of a much more interesting, mellow, low-key picture, which I think is what this really, that's when this movie really, really worked. And I said it in Rebecca and Mai's initial review that Marvel has come to a point where I think they can afford to take those kind of chances. I think they could have pushed this a little further, and yeah, some people might have walked out confused, but I think in the long run it would have been the better choice. It's still a really good movie. It's still a Marvel film, so odds are it's going to land on the, if not the outstanding, then the pretty good list no matter what. But I feel like there was a better movie waiting to happen, even if the one that we did get was still above average. And the number one meh movie of 2021 was Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. So, just like the Eternals, there was a lot of pressure on this one, because this was the first one of the release slate that was a completely original concept. We had Black Widow coming out, we had Spider-Man coming out, you had TV shows based on Captain America, WandaVision, Hawkeye, all these characters we'd already grown to love. So this was the first one, because it predates the Eternals, that was going to introduce to us a brand new character with a brand new status quo, supporting characters, and that was going to offer us our first real look as to where the Marvel Cinematic Universe might be headed in a post-Endgame world. So that's a lot of pressure to put on this film, and I think it rose to the challenge. It is, again, it's a Marvel film. It introduces us to another great character, another wonderful and colorful supporting cast. Definitely, I think, the best performance I've ever seen Awkwafina give. So, kudos to that. With fresh takes on action, a different cultural perspective, just a lot of really good things going into this movie. So then why does it top the meh list instead of being on the best list? Well, I'll tell you a secret, and I'll probably repeat myself when I go to do the best list. This actually was on the best list for a while. This one and the bottom one on the best list swapped places several times. What finally landed this one on the meh list, as opposed to the best, is that the film that it was bouncing back and forth with, I felt was much more consistent in tone and concept. This film, as I mentioned in my initial review, felt like I was actually watching two movies. The first one dealing with the underworld and street gangs and kung fu fighting and all this really cool stuff, and then the second, which gets very mystical and magical and dragons and ancient lands and a dark power locked behind a safe somewhere. And while none of it is bad, it is a very jarring tonal shift, and I still feel that it would have been better to let the first movie deal with the more grounded reality aspects, as close as reality can get in a Marvel movie, and then let the second one branch off into the more spiritual, interesting aspects of it that might link it to the greater Marvel universe as a whole. If I had to give one note to this new wave of Marvel films, which includes this one and the one we just talked about, the Eternals, it's this: slow down. In both cases, I feel what knocks these movies out of the best contention and into the just okay category is that it feels like they're in such a rush with them. They're trying so to get all of the new pieces and all the new continuity, piled into them so that we can proceed forward, again, in a post-Endgame world, because unlike with the original set of films, everything, pre-Endgame, in those we had an idea of where the franchise was headed. The Infinity Stones, Thanos, we knew that was the Endgame, quote unquote. Here, we're still all still putting the pieces together, that maybe it has something to do with the multiverse, maybe it has something to do with the Celestials, Nick Fury is out in space somewhere. There's a lot going on, and there's no clear path that the fans can see. And that's okay. That is okay. The original batch of films took their time. It let us get to know the characters. It let us enjoy the characters. Then it expanded on their various worlds. And it feels like the last two films are in such a hurry to want to get to the expanding part to ensure us that they have a plan in mind for where we're going next, that they're rushing a bit and not letting us savor and get to know the characters and their individual worlds. And I feel like that's the main drawback to both this one and the Eternals. Doesn't mean either one of them is a bad movie. It certainly doesn't make this one a bad movie. This is actually a fantastic movie and a great star turn for our lead actor. So I'm thrilled that this did as well as it did. I'm thrilled to know that we're going to get more of these, because I'm very interested to see what they do with the character next. But I still think they could have taken their time a bit more with it. So those reasons and others is why Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings is the #1 meh film of 2021. All right, so we have discussed the worst. We have discussed the rest. So the next time we meet, it is time. We're going to put a bow on 2021, and we are going to discuss my top 10 films of the year. So let's ditch the negativity and let's get to the positivity. So I'm looking forward to going through these, because there are some great films that I really, really want to revisit before we move on. So thank you very much for joining me. Thanks for riding along. And as always, drive safe, and I will see you at the movies.